Cinephile ASMR. And today, it's a different setup, it's a different vibe, and we're not even here to really talk about movies. We're here to talk about a different kind of story. One that is kind of a spiritual successor to a video I did, I want to say, like, maybe like 2 years ago, low-key. One of the craziest videos, maybe the craziest video I've ever done, which was ASMR horror stories, but in the middle of a park at night. And that video taught me a lot, but I want to kind of do more of that, not in a park, not in public, because that honestly was a horror video in and of itself, trying to record that. Long story about it, just simplified. Midway through, the cops came and they were wondering what I was doing. I mean, like, to their credit, I'm setting up a camera, I have lights with a microphone in the middle of a field, and then after that, after I explained myself, a family came at like 11 in the evening and literally started eating. I had to tell them, please, can you go away? Just a whole mess. But I really want to kind of make this more of a series, especially as I get more and more involved into Reddit. Believe it or not, despite me having an online presence, don't really use Reddit all too often, but I think you will find some of the most like-minded people, no matter what you search up, what your issue is, what your questions are, or just kind of venting. And that is where I have been able to compile 4 of the craziest stories that I spent the good better part of like a day scouring on different subreddits. The 2 biggest ones I use are r/let's not meet, and where I found these 4 were an r/nosleep, and I compiled them into a Word document and I printed it a little bit extra, but I really am so excited to do this. A large reason why as well is whether through TikTok or of course the endless stream of Redditors, there is so much of like a horror story trend where people recount stories of their own life, but also I haven't really been doing too good, and I've always found horror to be a genre that is an escape within an escape, that is dealing with events that are traumatic or big kind of changing moments for these people in these movies. And I've always found it to be like an alluring atmosphere and genre that I go to countlessly when I'm just not feeling good, and I have not been feeling good. So these stories, in a weird way, connect me to the characters, the people, and I think a lot of people get hung up on if something is real or not, whether the story that I'm going to tell you is fiction or not fake. But I feel like that's kind of missing the point. It is a story for you to get consumed in, and these are wild. These are so interesting. So please, if you can, find somewhere comfortable to sit, because this is going to be quite a long video. Let me know, out of all these stories, which was your favorite, and most importantly, please, if you are not doing okay, take this video, although spooky, although intense at moments, and pretty intense, I'm not gonna lie, viewer discretion is advised. It just deals with a lot of intense stuff. But if you're going through something, take this video as a sign to just know that it's okay. I should eat my words, because what I'm going through, it's just a lot, but I find it as therapeutic, hopefully, for you to watch as it is for me to film. So, get a beverage, get comfortable. As I'm going to, I got a pillow right behind me, got a blanket below me, in a cozy, much more safe area than an open park. And the first story we have tonight is from the r/nosleep subreddit, from a Redditor by the name of Mr_outlaw_, titled, "My roommate has been in the shower for more than 4 hours." So I just say, no better time or place to start than the very beginning. Let's do this thing. So I got home 11 p.m., late night at the office turned into an even later night at the bar. About 4 drinks deep at this point, and I am tired, just about ready to fall asleep. As I stumble through the doorway, I lay down on the couch and reach for my bag of Zaw. I'm gonna have to tune some of the language in here, but this is all true to what the Redditor posted. And spark one up as I pull YouTube on my laptop. I'm in the middle of watching some luxury cruise tour, close to passing out, when I hear the front door open. I sit up and turn my head ever so slightly, just enough to see my roommate coming in. He hangs his jacket in the closet and doesn't say anything, and walks slowly to his room, which is normal enough. I'd been living with him for about 3 months, long enough for me to pick up on most of his tendencies. This guy really doesn't talk unless spoken to, which was far from a problem for me. He also generally kept things clean on his end, never really causing much in the way of problems. I really couldn't complain. So I go back to watching YouTube, and about 5 minutes later, I hear the shower in his room turning on. Once again, nothing strange. At this point, I'm watching bare knuckle boxing highlights with my eyes half open, maybe 1 or 2 minutes away from passing out, waking up in darkness, my head hurting, my throat dry as hell. I sat up slowly, waiting for the grogginess to settle into something manageable. But once it did, I grabbed my phone, checked the time. It was around 3:30 a.m. from what I remember. I was starving, and so I got up, began walking towards the fridge, and then I noticed it. A soft but ever-present noise in the background. It took me a few seconds to really recognize what it was. The shower. Suddenly, the events of last night began replaying in my head. Drinking at the bar, Ubering home, laptop, couch, my roommate coming home, the shower turning on. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he went to bed and forgot to turn it off. I shook my head. There's no way that happened, I thought. Maybe he slipped and fell. Realizing the implications of this, I rushed towards his room, but found his bathroom door locked. I began pounding on it. Hey man, you alright? No response. I considered kicking the door down, but decided to call 911 before I did that. I took my phone out, preparing to dial, when I noticed that I had an unread text. One from my roommate. Hey man, I couldn't sleep, so I went over to my girlfriend's place. Not sure when I'll be back. Sent 2 hours ago. I look at the bathroom door, then back down at my phone. Everything about this was wrong. First of all, my roommate barely texts me, and certainly never to tell me that he's going out. Second of all, I know for a fact that he's single and has been for a while. And third of all, who the fuck was in the shower then? I tried calling him. No answer. Sent him some texts, but no response. I walked over to his desk and saw that his keys and wallet were still beside his laptop. My head is starting to spin at this point, and I get out of there. I go back into the living room and turn on the lights. I'm pacing around in a circle, trying to follow the plot, while also trying to ignore the shower. A noise that I never could have imagined being so dreadful in any context. Sometime later, I hear something vibrating on the kitchen counter. I move towards it and see that it's a phone. My roommate's phone. Dude. The panic begins setting in, and immediately I grab my keys and run out of the apartment. I make my way down the hall and take the stairs down to the lobby, but even even that doesn't seem far enough away, so I make my way over to the McDonald's across the street. I sit there for a while, considering calling the cops, but for some reason feeling too nervous to do so. But even though there's hardly anybody in there, the place begins to feel suffocating, and I decide to leave, walking back out onto the empty streets. Almost immediately, I get this feeling like I'm being watched, and I feel my gaze drifting up and towards the apartment. Soon I'm looking at my balcony, and I see somebody standing there. A dark figure stood completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin, but it isn't one. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I froze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what it was seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. In fact, it's too tall to be anybody I know, its head nearly scraping the bottom of the balcony above. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out any of its details. The darkness and distance may have been enough to explain that away, but there was something about it that drove me towards it, a different conclusion. That this thing simply possessed no details that could have been observed, that the only element of its composition was that of an unadulterated darkness. Of course, my gut instinct was to get the hell away from it, but the voice in my head was telling me that if I were to try and run, this thing would end up following me. I went back into the McDonald's instead, locking myself in the bathroom as I finally dialed 911. I told the operator that someone had broken into my place, but that I had gotten out of there without them noticing, but that they were still in there. It was the story that most accurately represented the situation without making me come off across as a complete assbat. The operator told me that they'd be sending somebody over for me to hang tight, so I left the bathroom, waiting at the table closest to the exit until I could see the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. I went outside to meet the cops, looking up at the balcony to find it empty, though the door to the living room had been left open. They pelted me with a bunch of questions that I found it difficult to answer. Is the intruder armed? Do I have an idea who it might be? What are their intentions? I told them I didn't know, that I couldn't figure it out, but they just kept on asking. Soon I was practically yelling at them to go up there and check it out for themselves, and I suppose the terror in my voice was enough for them to begin taking this seriously. They told me to wait by the entrance, and I watched on as they entered the building. I was out there for a long time, growing increasingly anxious at the thought of what they were going to tell me when they came down. A few minutes later, the silence was broken by a single, muffled gunshot. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I continued to wait there, unsure of what to do otherwise. 20 more minutes of silence, and the officer still hadn't come down. Soon I could hear more of them approaching in the distance. Before I knew it, 4 more cop cars had pulled up around me, and the scene had fallen into chaos. Officers shouting over each other and into their radios, more questions being hurled my way, none of which I was able to answer. The next few sequences were mostly a blur, but I remembered the building being evacuated, the tenants frightened and confused as they were ushered outside while the officers become more and more frantic. I remembered hearing more scattered gunshots, some screaming, other noises that were difficult to make sense of. There were a few lapses in my memory after that, but I recall being pushed into the back of a police car. After being driven to the station, I was led into one of the interrogation rooms where I found two nondescript men in suits waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves and immediately went into a series of questions, each one more bizarre than the last. What company was your roommate employed by? What was the nature of his job? How many different people have been inside your apartment since your roommate moved in? Have you ever heard the voices inside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? Voices that did not belong to your roommate. Have you seen a circle of people standing outside of the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? People that were exceptionally tall. And one of the most unsettling ones. Have you ever seen somebody standing at the front of your bed upon waking up between the hours of midnight to 3 a.m., only for them to disappear moments later? If so, do you remember what they looked like? Any distinct features? As they continued probing me, my mind began conjuring up some strange shit that had happened after my roommate had moved in. Shit that I had written off as figments of my imagination, simply because I had no other explanation for them. I did hear the voices, always coming from the room next to mine where my roommate slept. I was always so tired when I heard them, but I do remember it either sounding like a young woman or a man with an extremely deep voice. I could never make out any words. It always sounded like gibberish. And then there was that one time when I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, still half asleep. Didn't bother turning the lights on as I entered, but as my eyes began adjusting to the dark, I could have sworn that somebody was already sitting on the toilet. Somebody extremely tall. Dude, I got chills. Of course, when I turned on the lights, nothing was there. It was easy to chalk it up as a product of late night drowsiness at the time, and I had never really thought about it since. After doing my best to give them the useful information, the suits spent a good few minutes taking notes on their phones. Once they were done, they sat up quickly, told me that they'd be in touch. Before leaving the room, a cop came in a few minutes later and told me that since I couldn't return to the apartment, they would set me up in a nearby hotel until they were able to get the situation under control, and that I should stay put until they gave me a call. What happened? I asked him. What did you guys find up there? He stared at me for a long time, not as if he were deep in thought, but as if he held deep aversion for what he was considering telling me. Eventually he just shook his head. I don't know, he said. I mean, I really don't know. I nodded, tried to smile, though I'm not sure. It didn't come across very well. It's the next day now, and I'm in the hotel. Of course I couldn't sleep. Couldn't really eat. The officer hasn't called me yet. When I try searching up information about the evacuation on the internet, all I can find are articles claiming that it was due to a fire. A fucking fire. Update. I fell asleep and I just woke up. It's 1 a.m. now, and I can hear the shower. When I first read that story, there is something so visceral about the image of you looking up at this apartment building and scouting your flat, your room, and seeing a presence that you have never seen from afar in an area that should be so familiar to you. That sent chills all around my body, and I couldn't not tell this one. So I hope you enjoyed that one. So this next one is a bit of an interesting sort of way that I found it, but more importantly, the moment and reason why I realized that this needs to be a part of the video. I can't explain that without finishing the story, but all I'll say is Reddit is such a fascinating site or app, depending on how you use it. That's all I'll say. This next one's really good though. It comes from a Redditor by the name Dr. Terrifying, and it's titled, "Everyone Says My Hometown Doesn't Exist. What Happened to Casey Falls?" Everyone says my hometown doesn't exist. I'm beginning to believe them, but that doesn't mean that was always the case. Let me back up. The first time I encountered this bizarre denial was after my first semester at college. I trekked to the Amtrak station, luggage in tow, and asked the attendant for one ticket to Casey Falls, Michigan, please. She looked up from her desk and blinked. Where? Casey Falls, Michigan, I repeated, a smidge slower this time. After she performed a search on her computer, then sought counsel from her manager, they determined that if Casey Falls was a real place, it wasn't a stop on any of their lines. How can that be? I protested. I could see its train station as clearly in my mind's eye as their bewildered faces before me. Every spring break, I took the train with my family into Chicago, boarding at 7 o'clock in the morning at the platform just east of Perry Street. Dad would hand me $2 to buy a Coke and a bag of pretzels from the vending machines before the train arrived. My younger sister Janie and I sat impatiently on the benches, waiting for our journey to begin. But relaying this memory to the exasperated attendants did little to correct their system, which omitted Casey Falls from its available destinations. I spent that Christmas alone in my dorm, desperately trying to get a hold of my family, but none of them answered. Mom, Dad, sister, phone, email, text, Facebook, nothing. Even stranger was that overnight their online presence vanished, erased socials, bounced emails. When I called again, a recording informed me that the numbers I was trying to reach had been disconnected. What is going on? The following 2 weeks, ordinarily spent opening presents, reconnecting with high school friends, ringing in the new year, were instead subsumed under my intense investigation. I scrubbed the internet for any mention of my hometown. I came up empty-handed, despite endless hours scouring Google, Yahoo, even Bing. I found no mention of the central Michigan burg ensconced in forest, home to Casey Falls Army Training Camp and the defunct collapsed copper mines. Even Google Maps erased Casey Falls from its record, when ordinarily I would see the cluster of homes and farms in Main Street. There is only a green swath of forest land. My hometown had literally been wiped off the map. Worse yet, it was beginning to disappear from my own memory. As a break on, and my ceaseless search failed to yield a shred of evidence of my hometown's existence, I noticed my own recollection of it fading. While staring bleary-eyed at the television on New Year's Eve, watching revelers crowd Times Square to watch the Spangled Ball drop, I realized I couldn't remember any previous New Year's Eve. How had I spent them in Casey Falls? Maybe it was common to forget a few, for their memories to bleed into one another, to mix up which party went with which year, but to lose every single New Year's Eve from one's personal history. I felt hollow. And in the void where Casey Falls and my preceding 18 years of memories should have been. Something dark and sinister lurked. When my roommate returned in January and saw that I had been holed up in our dorm for the entire break, he naturally inquired what happened. What happened indeed, was my mad response. Desperate for a memory of home, even if secondhand, I interrogated Sean. Surely you remember me talking about home at some point, right? I asked. And while he agreed that surely in our various 2 a.m. chats we must have touched on the subject, he was charged to admit nothing specific returned. The silver lining to this distressing chat was that I now had a partner. Sean, fascinated by my absent origin, took up the cause with me. He caught up quick, performing his own research online before arriving at the conclusion that we had to see for ourselves. So, on a weekend in late January, he drove us in his junky sedan into the heart of the Mitten, to where Casey Falls should have carved out a space for itself from the surrounding forest. To my horror, we found only trees. Where Maine should have intersected with Blanchard, there was only a dirt drive reaching back into the woods. Sean didn't think his car would handle the uneven road too well, but after some pleading, he acquiesced. We drove slow along the forested road, tree branches squeezing us into a tunnel of foliage. Right here, I said. Casey Falls should be right here. I leapt out of the car and raced through the woods. I'm not sure why. I don't think it was rational, just my emotions taking control. A medley comprising of anger, grief, confusion, fear that propelled me through the underbrush until I tripped over something metal. I turned back to find a green box, like a geocache, resting on the forest floor. Inside, pages yellowed with age featured some sort of code scrawled across them, written with only half-decent penmanship. What the hell is that? Asked Sean when he finally caught up to me. It was the question we tried pairing with an answer over the ensuing months. Neither of us were real code breakers, so we shopped the pages around campus, taking it to math nerds and professors in the hopes one of them might crack it. One by one, they tried their best to decipher the documents, but each one met invariably with defeat. One professor called it the toughest code she'd ever encountered, while another suggested in all likelihood the pages were rubbish. But the fact that I'd found it where my hometown should have kept me from accepting the latter explanation. Something was written in those pages, something that had helped explain what happened to Casey Falls. But I'll never uncover its secrets, because on March 3rd, someone tore our dorm room apart, and the only thing they took with them was the coded pages. Spooked by this flagrant invasion of privacy, Sean told me he would pursue the Casey Falls mystery no further. He believed that by showing the documents around campus, we had attracted the attention of the feds, CIA, NSA, some other three-letter agency no one had ever heard of, and now we were being watched. Whatever happened to your hometown, Sean said. They don't want anyone to find out. The next week, Sean transferred out, enrolling in a school on the East Coast. He left without saying goodbye, another exit without ceremony. I've since taken a barista job to be able to stay in Chicago through the summer, since I've got nowhere else to go, while reckoning with the fact I've become an orphan in every sense of the word. I can't help shaking the feeling that someone is watching me. Whatever happened to Casey Falls, it wasn't good. I can feel it in my bones, the unheard screams of family and neighbors vibrating in the marrow. I feel them, and it makes me sick, but I cling to the horror because it's all I have left of home. So I think this story, out of all of these, for me is the easiest to maybe disregard or pass off as fake, because it is very wordy. It feels like it is written for this theatricality in mind. And to its credit, I think it is quite effective. And again, like I said earlier, to me, it isn't about if it's real or not, but I think it is a fascinating story. And what I also said earlier was that I put this on because it wasn't just the story, which I thought was good, but the comments themselves really put a lot of things under a microscope that I didn't think of. There was at least like 70 to 80 comments, and mind you, as the release of this video, these are all stories that were like filtered by my hand that have been posted within this week. There's so many, and these comments ranged from people in shock, in disbelief, but also articles, legitimate articles posted by news publications about people experiencing similar vanishings of hometowns, of places of familiarity, once familiarity, which is gone to them. What they called home was now just empty vacancy. And I saw some comments of people listing off different towns that have now just been blown away off the map, off of people's records. And I think, to me, it capitalizes on one of the best parts about Reddit, which is its universality, and how no matter what is happening, whatever you have to say, there will more likely than not be someone who is willing to listen, but also offer some insight. And that, to me, like, really sent chills down my spine, that if this is true, entertaining that fact, this is a worldwide thing. But at the end of the day, if for anything, it was just a really good story. So this next one, I had to take a couple minutes after, because I was so locked in to the structure of this story, but also where it led to, and just the whole vibe of it. I had to take a minute. Again, from the r/nosleep subreddit, this comes from a Redditor by the name of J_T13, called "We Called the Wrong 911. So again, I'm gonna have to reword certain things so it doesn't kind of allude you. You will know what I'm talking about, and this plays in kind of almost like a script in a way. Hello, hello, please, I need your help. Jerry grasped his stomach, his face contorted in a grimace of pain. My stomach, I think I have a tummy ache. I unsuccessfully stifled a laugh. Then we were rolling around the basement, hooting and hollering. A couple hours into our sesh, we couldn't help but try a few harmless prank calls. We exhausted our options of the local restaurants and calling Jerry's cousin with my phone before we got the brilliant idea to try 911. I was against it. Jerry's argument was we lived in a small town and the operators wouldn't mind a break from the boredom. He won. Ah, my tummy, Jerry wailed. He threw his arms above his head, pretending to gasp for air. I cackled, slapping my knee. It really wasn't that funny, but we were zonked out of our minds. Jerry had flung his phone across the room during his exaggerated performance. I stumbled toward it, short bursts of laughter firing from my chest. The call was still connected. No problem. I went to hang up. A woman's voice droned through the speaker. "We are sending someone your way." "No, wait." I brought the phone to my ear. The line disconnected. Damn it, Jerry. He was still wreathing on the ground. "Jerry, I think they're actually coming." He stopped and craned his neck until he was looking at me upside down. "For real?" "Yes, dude, they said someone's coming." Jerry paused. A confused look passed over his face. "But how? We didn't even give them an address." "I think they can track that shit now." "Cap," he shook his head. "No way. That's gotta be illegal. Tracking your location." He looked at me, grasping for validation. It's the police. "It's the police, not some hacker in a Starbucks." Jerry moved quickly towards the TV and plopped himself down on the couch. "Whatever, they pull up, we say wrong house." He brought up Netflix. The za in my system soon scrubbed the worry from my thoughts. We sat and enjoyed the show until a dull knock from upstairs interrupted. Jerry jumped from the couch and looked at me wide-eyed. Shit. We were at Jerry's house and both in high school. His parents were out of town for the weekend, but if they heard about this, he could forget about summer break. I didn't think they'd actually come. Shit. Hide the saw. "Shut up. Relax. They'll go after a while," I said. He was starting to really freak. There weren't any windows. His basement was completely underground. Another knock floated down the stairs. Unable to bring his attention back to the TV, he jumped in the air again. Lights. I left the lights on upstairs. "You are an idiot." Jerry's eyes were hot red. In contrast, the situation was sobering me up. I scratched my head roughly. "Alright, I think I can talk to them. Stay down here." He thanked me profusely and gave me water to chug for my breath. At the top of the steps, I looked back. Jerry gave me a thumbs up and waved me on from the bottom. Like he said, the living room lights were on, and through the opaque glass of the front door, there was two silhouettes. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror and walked nervously toward the front. That moment, with the knob in my hand, I could have made a decision that saved me from the paranoia I've suffered since. Instead, I let them in. The porch lights were off. The glow from the living room birthed uncanny shadows through the screen door onto the faces of the two outside. I waited for them to speak, soundless and motionless, seemingly refusing to breathe. From each of their shadow-masked faces, I could only make out a wide smile with teeth dimly illuminated behind the screen. That silence was far too uncomfortable. I started. "Apologies for disturbing you," one interrupted. He sounded young. It caught me off guard. Maybe it was the dark, but their smiles never moved as they talked. "There has been an emergency. We are looking for Jerry." Alarm bells started ringing. "You might have the wrong house. Sorry, sirs." I moved to close the door. We had never mentioned our real names on the call. "Jeremy." That voice sounded familiar. It was enough for me to jump away from the door as if electrocuted. One of the silhouettes outside pressed its face into the screen. "Jeremy, come here right now." "Mom," Jeremy's voice called limply from the basement. Air evacuated my lungs. The screen door was opening, with no thoughts in my head beside to flee, to put as much distance between me and the thing coming in. I scrambled up the stairs to the second floor. It was closer than the basement, and I locked myself in a bathroom. I started to type out a text to warn Jerry. There were muffled voices from the living room. "You must be Jerry." Too late. Yes, where's my mom?" She stepped outside. "What seems to be the problem, Jerry?" "Oh, that was an accident. We butt-dialed you, I think." Yes, your friend. Do you know where he is?" I sent a burst of texts to Jerry. "Don't trust them. Your mom's not here." "Yeah, you need to get out." "I'm not sure. He was supposed to answer the door. Is everything alright, Jerry?" There was a pause. Then Jerry spoke, unsure and slow. "Yes, it is okay. Is it alright if I step out to talk to my mom? She must be really worried." "Why, yes." I heard footsteps start before the sound of a scuffle. Hey, what the hell? There was banging and then the sounds of glass shattering. "Quiet him." Good. A frantic grunting followed. The initial fear was beginning to dissolve. The urge to save my friend powered my legs. I crept down the stairs painfully, one step at a time, listening to the voices, the silhouettes from the dark, speak over Jerry's feeble cries. "I have a rookie here with me today, so please be patient." Halfway down the stairs, the wall ended. The slowest I've ever moved was right then, creeping my head around the edge until half of one eye was clear. They were facing away from me, two men in paramedic uniforms standing over Jerry. He was on the ground, bound by straps, with gauze shoved in his mouth. One of the paramedics with long hair knelt. He ran a hand over Jerry's face, who shook him off and yelped, "Give him some monoxide." The long-haired paramedic reached into his bag and began attaching tubes to a gas canister, with the bag having red letters CO scrawled across it. Jerry's eyes widened as he began thrashing even harder. He attached the other end to a mask and turned a valve on the canister. A hissing sound filled the room, and the gas mask was forced over Jerry's mouth and nose. "Hold him." After 30 seconds, Jerry's attempts to free himself noticeably weakened. Within minutes, he was unconscious. During all of this, I tried desperately to think of someone who could help us. I didn't want to call anyone, afraid they'd hear me from where I was. My parents were asleep. Even if someone was awake, they'd probably call 911. That's what brought them here. "Go ahead, do the assessment." The paramedic directing the long-haired one was short and stocky. He turned the valve and the hissing quieted. He pointed at Jerry, signaling Longhair to continue. Once again, he over Jerry's face, then through his hair reaching behind his ears down to his neck. Long hair went over Jerry's entire body, prodding, pushing, and groping every inch of him. When he reached his toes, he turned towards his partner, flashing a grin. Nothing wrong with him. That's terrible news. What was the chief complaint? Abdominal pain. He shook his head. We missed our offering tonight. Young, healthy. This one will make up for it. Bag and tag. You'll learn a lot from him. Longhair nodded and exited the house. The stocky one rummaged through another bag and pulled out a Sharpie. He lifted Jerry's shirt and began drawing a dotted line below the navel. I can't see you. I flinched. Somehow I knew he was talking to me. But I know you're there. I want you to know that this isn't any fault of yours or his. This, us, you can call it coincidence or fate, whichever you believe, but believe in it. He capped the Sharpie. The dotted line had become a dotted oval, stretching across Jerry's abdomen and encircling his belly button. We're here to help. Long-haired walked back in with the stretcher. They quickly loaded Jerry up. He was still unconscious with the mask on him. Long-haired wheeled him out the door, and the other called after him. That's where you're going to cut. Get the tools ready. Then he looked into my eye. He smiled. When he spoke, he used Jerry's voice. Does your tummy hurt too? I could barely move, but shook my head. Goodbye. When the house was empty, I cried so hard I passed out. In the morning, when I woke up, I searched the entire house for Jerry, for proof that it was all a nightmare. There was no evidence of Jerry or the paramedics. Haven't seen them since. I called the police, the real ones this time. The story that stuck was I woke up and he was gone. I got a ticket for the Zaw. That's really it. There was nothing to prove my involvement, nothing that could prove anything really. Didn't just lose Jerry that day. Nobody talks to me. Can't even ask for homework answers anymore. All the adults try to hide their conversations about me. Not that I even care much. To be honest, I'm still looking for my best friend. A week ago, it was late driving home from work. An ambulance pulled up beside me at a stop. Its lights weren't on, but I kept my foot on the brake when the traffic light turned green. I desperately tried to get a look inside from the back window, but it was just too dark to see. Just make sure, next time, that it's really an emergency when you dial that number. And if you do, make sure that it's really them. Dude, honestly, I love that story. It is such a fascinating kind of look into a moment that I think we've all experienced, where we are in a moment of silliness and we do something just off the cuff, just very naive. But I think this takes more of a sort of like extraterrestrial alien perspective, and there was something about just the simplicity of an idea about two friends completely and innocuously doing something that, admittedly dumb, they meant with the utmost best intentions. And it turns in to him losing his best friend, but it's the circumstances around it that I think are just so fascinating. I love the story, and I think given how long these stories were, and the fact, realistically speaking, this next story is like 5 to 6 pages long. If this video does well, if you liked this format and these stories, I will include this last story, which I saved as the last one for a reason, because it really is a whole narrative, and I will include some more that I find. So let me know, guys. I really liked doing this. I mean, it's a nice, cozy means to record, and I've just been, like, it hasn't been good. All I will say, not to get too into it, but change is inevitable. But at this point in my life, there is a lot of change happening. I just wanted to slow down and stop, and I can't. So I do this. I make videos, and for a fleeting moment, when either I'm recording, assembling what I need, or editing and uploading, this is my control. So, thank you. I love you guys. I love you guys so much. Let me know, seriously, if you would like for me to do more of this. Comment below. I'm very excited. Like, subscribe if you haven't. You guys mean the world to me. Thank you for sticking it out, not just in this video, but in general. And if you are going through change, we're not alone. I hope it gets better. I think it will. So thank you.